Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe an apology, an explanation, or even some half-hearted attempt at damage control. But when she looked at me and said, "You'll forgive me eventually," I realized she didn't care about offering any of those things. I had come home earlier than usual, not out of suspicion, but because something inside me told me I needed to be there. It was a restless pull, an instinct I couldn't ignore. I remember opening the door and immediately sensing something was off. The living room lights were dimmed, the kind she used when she wanted to unwind, but she wasn't there. No book, no TV. The house was unnaturally quiet. Then I saw her phone on the kitchen counter. She never left it lying around, never. It was always in her hand, practically an extension of her. But there it was, screen glowing with a recent notification. That was the first crack in my reality. I didn't have to search for anything. The message was right there on the lock screen. Can't stop thinking about last night. I stared at it, my mind refusing to accept what was in front of me. It didn't make sense. Not her, not us. My hands felt detached as I picked up the phone, swiping up instinctively, my heart pounding against my chest. The chat was open. The name didn't matter. The words did. There were no passionate confessions, no dramatic exchanges, just comfort, familiarity. The kind of intimacy that only happens when things have been going on for a while. Footsteps from the hallway. I turned, still holding the phone, and there she was. No panic, no stammering, no scrambling for a lie, just a flicker of recognition in her eyes before she sighed, as if this moment had been coming, as if she was relieved it was finally out in the open. And then she said it. That one sentence. That branded itself into my memory. "You'll forgive me eventually." It wasn't a plea, it wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the same casual certainty as someone announcing the weather, as if she knew me better than I knew myself. Laughed, not because it was funny, but because my body didn't know how else to react. She just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to fall apart, to yell, to cry, to demand an explanation. But I didn't do any of those things. I just looked at her. And for the first time, I realized I had never truly seen her before, not like this. The woman I married wouldn't have done this. The woman I married wouldn't be standing there emotionless, as if she were announcing she forgot to pick up milk. But maybe she never existed. Maybe I had been in love with a version of her that only lived in my head. The silence between us stretched thick and suffocating. I wanted to ask why, but what was the point? The answer was right there in those messages. It wasn't passion. It wasn't a mistake. It was indifference, a slow, steady detachment that had been creeping in unnoticed until it finally revealed itself. I finally spoke, my voice steady. "No, I won't." Her eyes flickered just for a second. Surprise, maybe even uncertainty. She hadn't considered that possibility. I set her phone back on the counter and walked past her into the bedroom. I needed space, even if just a few feet. She didn't follow me, she didn't say another word. And for the first time in our marriage, I had no desire to hear anything else she had to say. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, my mind reeling, playing over every moment that had led to this, every excuse she made, every late night spent working, every trip she took alone for business. I had been a fool, not because I trusted her, but because I had ignored the signs. I had believed the little lies because it was easier than questioning them, because I didn't want to be that husband, the one who suspected, the one who accused, the one who assumed the worst, but the worst had already happened. I could hear her moving around in the other room, but I didn't go out there. I didn't want to look at her. I didn't want to see the expression she wore when she said, "You'll forgive me eventually," like it was just another minor inconvenience she could deal with in her own time. I ran through the last few months in my head, each moment adding another piece to the puzzle. I had ignored the business trips, the late nights, the sudden distance, the guarded phone, the little fights over nothing. At the time, I had chalked it up to stress or maybe just the ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. But now I understood. She had justified it to herself, convincing herself she had a reason to detach, a reason to cheat. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right now, all I felt was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones, the kind that makes it hard to breathe, let alone stand up. She hadn't even tried to hide it. She hadn't been careful. She hadn't been discreet because she had assumed I wouldn't leave, that I would be hurt, that I would be devastated, sure, but that eventually I would forgive her. But that was her mistake. I wasn't going to be another cliché. I wasn't going to be the guy who stayed, who forgave because it was easier. I stood up, the decision clear. This marriage was over. The only thing left was for her to realize it. I don't remember how long I stayed in that bedroom, standing there, staring at the walls as everything unraveled in real time. When I finally walked out, she was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. No attempt to smooth things over, no fake remorse, no nervous energy. She wasn't worried, and that hit me the hardest. She didn't think she had anything to lose. I grabbed my keys, walked out, and got into the car. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to be anywhere but there. But the thing is, you can't outrun something like this. It follows you. It seeps into your skin, into your thoughts, into the spaces between your ribs. I drove without direction, ended up in some parking lot, staring at the dashboard like it held answers. I could have stayed out all night, but when I finally went back home, she was already asleep, as if this was just another night, as if everything was business as usual. And for a while, I let it be. Not because I forgave her, not because I wanted to fix anything, but because I needed to see what she would do next. If she would break the silence, if she would try to explain, if she would at least pretend to care. She didn't. The next morning, she went about her routine like nothing had changed. Coffee, emails, a quick glance at the weather. I sat across from her, watching, waiting. Nothing. Not a single word about what had happened, no hesitation, no guilt, not even an attempt at small talk. I tested it. I didn't say anything either. I wanted to see how long she could keep up the act, how long she could pretend that the previous night hadn't cracked something fundamental between us. Days passed. The silence stretched. She still came home late, still kept her phone close, still acted like I was just part of the furniture, something she had grown used to, something she didn't have to think about. But everything was different for me. Our home, the one place, that had always been mine, now felt like a stranger's house. The walls felt smaller, the air heavier. Even the way the sunlight came through the windows seemed wrong, like it was exposing something I hadn't noticed before. I stopped eating at the table with her. I stopped responding to her half-hearted questions about my day. I stopped pretending that we were just in some temporary rough patch, because this wasn't temporary. This was the aftermath, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand living inside of it. She just went on as if the silence between us wasn't suffocating, as if my absence from our bed didn't matter, as if she hadn't set fire to everything. We had built and expected me to just live in the ashes, so I forced it. It wasn't planned. I wasn't waiting for the right moment. The right moment had passed the second she had looked me in the eye and told me I'd forgive her. I just walked in one evening, saw her sitting on the couch with her laptop, and said, "We need to talk." She didn't even look up right away, just finished typing something before closing the screen, like she was doing me a favor by giving me her attention. Okay. That was it. No hesitation, no concern, just that empty, indifferent, okay. I sat across from her. I was done playing her game. "How long?" I asked. Her lips pressed together slightly, just enough to tell me she wasn't expecting that. Question. "Does it matter?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, it does." She sighed, finally leaning back, crossing her arms. A while I nodded. I had already known that, but hearing it from her made it settle in a different way. "Why?" I asked. She tilted her head, studying me like I had asked something complicated. "Because I could." I blinked. "That's it?" She shrugged. "What do you want me to say? That I was unhappy? That I felt trapped? Would that make you feel better?" It wasn't what she was saying that hit me. It was how she was saying it, like she had no interest in softening the blow, like she had already accepted that I knew the truth and had no reason to dress it up. "You didn't even try to hide it," I said, shaking my head. "Did you want me to find out?" A pause. "Then I didn't care if you did." I just stared at her. I had spent so much time trying to understand why she had done it, why she had stayed, why she had looked me in the eye that night and assumed I would eventually forgive her. But I realized in that moment I had been asking the wrong questions. She hadn't done this because she was lost, or because she was in love with someone else, or because she was searching for something she couldn't find in our marriage. She had done it because I had never been a factor in her decision-making at all. I wasn't someone she had betrayed. I was just someone who happened to find out. Something inside me clicked into place. Then the last piece of whatever hold she had over me finally snapped. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, looking her dead in the eyes. "You think I'm going to stay?" Her expression didn't change. "You think I'll move past this? That I'll wake up one day and decide this isn't worth throwing everything away for?" Nothing. No reaction. "You're wrong." That was the first time I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not regret, not fear, just surprise, like she had never even considered that she might have miscalculated. That flicker of surprise in her eyes was gone as fast as it had come. She recovered quickly, settling back into that cold, detached confidence, the same look she had given me the night she told me I'd forgive her, like she was still convinced that none of this would truly change anything. She thought she knew me. She thought I would yell, break something, demand explanations, maybe even threaten to leave, but that in the end, I would stay. She had no idea what was coming. I stood up, didn't argue, didn't ask any more questions. I had everything I needed. I grabbed my jacket from the chair and walked past her without another word. "Where are you? Going?" she asked, finally showing a sliver of curiosity. I didn't answer. I didn't even slow down because this wasn't her game anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind was too sharp, too clear. I had spent weeks, maybe even months, living in the fog of this slow-motion disaster. But now I knew exactly what had to be done. I didn't want revenge. I didn't need some dramatic explosion of anger or a carefully crafted scheme to make her pay. She had already lost me, whether she realized it yet or not. That was enough. What I wanted was freedom. I called a lawyer first thing in the morning. I had no idea what I was walking into. Divorce wasn't something I had ever thought I'd have to navigate, but I was done wasting time, done pretending there was anything left to salvage. The paperwork, the assets, the legal procedures, I was ready for all of it. I was ready to make this real. She still didn't see it coming. She noticed the shift, of course. Anyone would have. I stopped playing along with her charade. I stopped giving her the silent treatment like I was waiting for something. I stopped reacting to anything she did. She wasn't the center of my life anymore. I could see the way it threw her off, the way she expected tension, anger, some kind of emotional eruption. But there was nothing left in me for her to manipulate, and then came the moment she hadn't been prepared for. I came home one evening, dropped a stack of documents onto the kitchen counter, and slid them across to her. "You need to sign." She looked down at the papers, then back at me, still too calm, still thinking she had some kind of control. "You're serious?" "Completely." She hesitated. That was new. She had spent so much time convincing herself that this was just a phase for me, that my anger would fade, that eventually I would come back to the version of myself she had grown comfortable with, the one who let things go. She finally understood that wasn't happening. For the first time, she was the one scrambling for words. "We don't have to rush into this," she said, her voice measured, careful. "We can take some time to—" "No," her mouth snapped shut. This was the moment, the one where she realized that I wasn't making threats, wasn't playing games. This was final. I saw something flicker across her face, then something close to fear. Not fear of losing me, not fear of what she had done, but fear of losing control. She wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. She didn't sign the papers right away. I knew she wouldn't. It wasn't about love, guilt, or regret. It was about power. For the first time since this whole mess started, she wasn't the one in control. Days passed. She tried to shift the dynamic, to pull me back in, but this time there was nothing she could do. It was like a slow poison creeping into every corner of my mind. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the way it sat there, waiting, lingering in the spaces between us. I drove for hours aimlessly until I ended up in some empty parking lot, staring at the dashboard like it could offer some kind of explanation. I could have kept driving, kept running, but when I finally went back home, she was already asleep, as if nothing had changed, as if everything was still fine. For a while, I let it go on like that, not because I forgave her, not because I wanted to fix things, but because I needed to see what she would do next. Would she break the silence? Would she try to explain? Would she at least pretend to care? She didn't. The next morning, she went through her routine like nothing had happened. Coffee, emails, a quick glance at the weather. I sat across from her, watching, waiting, nothing. Not a word about the night before, no hesitation, no guilt, no small talk. I didn't say anything either. I wanted to see how long she could keep up the act, how long she could pretend that something fundamental hadn't cracked between us. Days passed, the silence stretched on. She still came home late, still kept her phone too close, still treated me like I was just background noise in her life. But everything was different for me. Our home, the one place that used to feel like mine, now felt like a stranger's house. The walls felt smaller, the air thicker. Even the sunlight that used to pour through the windows seemed wrong, like it was exposing things I hadn't noticed before. I stopped eating with her, stopped answering her casual questions about my day. I stopped pretending we were just going through a rough patch. This wasn't temporary. This was the aftermath, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand to live in it. She, however, didn't seem to notice. She just kept going through the motions, acting like my absence didn't matter, as if the fire she'd set to everything we had built was nothing but smoke to be blown away. So I forced it. It wasn't planned. I wasn't waiting for the right moment. The right moment had passed the second she had looked me in the eye and said I'd forgive her. I just walked in one evening, saw her sitting on the couch with her laptop, and said, "We need to talk." She didn't even look up immediately, just finished typing something before closing the screen, like she was doing me a favor by giving me her attention. "Okay," she said, barely glancing at me, no concern, no hesitation, just that empty, indifferent "okay." I sat across from her. I was done playing her game. "How long?" I asked. Her lips pressed together in a small, tight line, as though she hadn't expected that question. "Does it matter?" she replied, almost bored. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, it does," she sighed, finally leaning back, arms crossed. A while I already knew that, but hearing it from her made it real in a different way. "Why?" I asked. She tilted her head, studying me like I'd just asked something too complicated. "Because I could," she said, shrugging as if it was the simplest answer in the world. "That's it?" I pressed, trying to make sense of her cold honesty. "What do you want me to say?" she asked, as if I were the one asking something unreasonable. "That I was unhappy? That I felt trapped? Would that make you feel better?" It wasn't her words that hit me, but the way she said them, without a trace of remorse. She had no interest in softening the blow. She had already accepted that I knew the truth, and she had no reason to dress it up. "You didn't even try to hide it," I said, shaking my head. "Did you want me to find out?" A pause. "Then I didn't care if you did." I stared at her. Everything I thought I understood about our marriage shattering in that moment. She hadn't done this because she was lost or because she was in love with someone else. She hadn't done it because she was searching for something she couldn't find in me. She had done it because to her I was never really a factor in her decisions. I wasn't someone she had betrayed. I was just someone who happened to find out. Something inside me clicked. Then the last shred of whatever hold she had over me snapped into place. "You think I'm going to stay?" I asked, leaning forward, looking her dead in the eye. "You think I'll move past this? That I'll wake up one day and decide this isn't worth throwing everything away for?" Her expression didn't change. She didn't flinch, just waited for me to break, waited for me to crack. I didn't. "You're wrong," I said. The words were fine. There was no hesitation. And that's when it hit her. The flicker of surprise in her eyes told me everything. She hadn't considered this. She had assumed that no matter what, I would stay, that her actions would just be part of a rough patch. She had miscalculated, but there was no going back. She recovered quickly, though, slipping back into that cold, detached confidence. The same expression she had given me the night she told me I'd forgive her, like she was still convinced this was all just a phase. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked past her without a word. "Where are you going?" she asked, a sliver of curiosity creeping into her voice. I didn't answer. I didn't even slow down. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was too sharp, too clear. For weeks I had been lost in a fog of confusion, but now I knew exactly what had to be done. I wasn't angry, I didn't need revenge, I didn't need some grand theatrical confrontation. What I wanted, what I needed, was freedom. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Divorce wasn't something I'd ever thought I'd have to navigate, but I was. Done wasting time, done pretending there was anything left to fix. I was ready for it all, the paperwork, the assets, the legal battles. I was ready to make this real. She still didn't see it coming. She noticed the shift, of course. How could she not? I stopped playing along with her charade. I stopped reacting to her little games. I wasn't waiting for something to change anymore. She wasn't the center of my world anymore. And then came the moment she hadn't prepared for. I came home one evening, dropped a stack of papers on the kitchen counter, and slid them toward her. "You need to sign." She looked at the papers, then at me, still too calm, still thinking she had control. "You're serious?" she asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "Completely," I said, pulling a pen from my jacket and setting it beside her hand. She hesitated. That was new. "We don't have to rush into this," she said, her voice measured, like she was trying to regain some semblance of control. "We can take some time to—" "No," I cut in, firm. Her mouth snapped shut, the reality finally sinking in. This wasn't a game. I wasn't playing for her attention. This was final. I saw it then, the flicker of fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing control. For the first time since this whole mess started, she wasn't the one calling the shots. She didn't sign the papers right away. I knew she wouldn't. It wasn't about love, guilt, or regret. It was about power. Days passed. She tried to shift the dynamic, tried to pull me back in with calculated gestures like nothing had happened. She cooked dinner, she set the table, she poured the wine, and made small talk. But none of it was real. None of it was enough to erase the truth. And then one morning, she signed, not because she wanted to, not because she accepted it, but because she knew I wouldn't give her another chance. She slid the papers across the table, her hand trembling slightly, and asked the question she'd been avoiding from the start. "Is this really what you want?" I picked up the papers, folded them neatly, and stood up. "No," I said, my voice steady, "but it's what I need." And just like that, our story came to an end. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.